Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Oh, you are awesome. Thank you for coming tonight. This is going to be really exciting. We have Dr. Griffin from NASA. You can tell your friends now you know a rocket scientist. Is that cool? I can't wait to go to the gym and tell my friends. Two quick housekeeping items. We have notes for you to take if you're in any of the 8 introduction to leadership classes. Take those and use them for the midterm and your final exam and totally impress your instructors. And the second one is an evaluation form. We put on a lot of events. I'm Dr. Annabelle Brooks. Sorry, I didn't tell you that earlier. The Institute for Values, Community, and Leadership puts on many events throughout the year, and your input's really important to us. So please take a moment to fill this out. Tell us what you liked. Tell us what you'd like to see differently. If you'd rather have coffee instead of tea, let us know that too. Okay. Who here is ready to hear about Dr. Griffin? Okay. Dr. Timothy Griffin, our very special guest this evening, is of course from NASA, and he's going to be talking about leadership in the context of scientific research. How many of you here are either in the sciences or research, either qualitative or quantitative? Okay, good show. Dr. Griffin received his bachelor's degree in chemistry from the University of Kansas and his PhD from the University of Florida in analytic chemistry emphasizing mass spectrometry. How many of you know what that is? Okay, I'm impressed. While in Costa Rica, Dr. Griffin worked with the U.S. Embassy and visited a small research center and gave a presentation to Costa Rican scientists about the work that he was doing, and he's especially proud of that. He loves to scuba dive. He dove in the Solomon Islands on World War II wrecks, and he was actually diving on a Japanese airplane wreck when the Millennium New Year came around in the year 2000. Dr. Griffin is a member of a jazz band. How many musicians here tonight? Okay. And plays most of the brass instruments. He is also the proud father of 2 daughters, age 9 and 10. Dr. Griffin, welcome.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, a privilege. I'm really, hopefully, you'll learn a little bit about something and we'll tell you about what we're doing. When I was first contacted to come down and come up, I guess, to give the talk, I had to stop and think a little bit. This is a little bit different of a talk than I normally do. I don't normally go and talk about leadership. Normally I either talk about NASA in general or I get into the really scientific nitty-gritty detail. So I had to revamp my talk, and one of the things that I decided was to kind of start with telling you a little bit about myself. It's a very convoluted trail as to where I got here. So the point is that you can start one place and end up somewhere totally different that you never thought of. Just kind of going into that. Okay, so I graduated from a small town in Missouri. So being in the Midwest, I never really thought about going and working for NASA or doing anything with the space program. I knew about NASA. I liked what they did. I remember the shuttle. I remember when the first shuttle launches, we were very interested in them. But never really thought about going and working for NASA. And then after high school, I went and graduated from Johnson County Community College, where I got an associate's degree in electrical engineering. And I used that in order to became the technical service manager for a company that repaired anesthesia equipment. So I went back to school and got my bachelor's degree from the University of Kansas. Now, I knew I wanted to couple the chemistry with the electronics, because I love to build instrumentation and I love to do things with my hands. And so I knew I wanted to build the equipment, but I also knew I wanted to lead the teams that built the equipment. And in chemistry, you pretty much have to have a PhD in order to lead the teams. You can without one, but it's more difficult to get into those positions. So I went to the University of Florida and earned my PhD in developing instrumentation. It's kind of neat because the equipment I used actually was used for people after me to help earn their PhDs. So it's kind of neat to know that the things you're doing makes a difference with other people. I then, after school, after graduating with my PhD, I became, they called me the Vice President of Research and Development. It was a real small company. They didn't really have enough money to do research and development. So I didn't stay there for too long, and I ended up going to an on-center contractor at Kennedy Space Center. Went from there into working for NASA, and I've been with NASA now for 11 years. And I'm a chemist, a researcher, a project lead, and I'm currently a supervisor. Now, talking about leadership, I was thinking about it. I was kind of thinking, what's one of the big things that leaders have to do? And I believe that one of the things you have to do is get your team and those around you to see your vision. You have to bring people together and empower them to do what needs to be done. And especially that's very important where I work, because you never know how long you'll actually be on a team. You might start a team and get it going, and then you might have to go somewhere else. So if you have a vision and you want a project to succeed, you need to make sure the people that are with you also are able to continue on if you are not able to continue. So I thought of a couple leaders. I'm going to go back to ancient China, well, not necessarily ancient China, but back in the 1400s to the Yongle Emperor. Now, before he became in power, Confucianism ruled China, and what they wanted to do was they wanted to seal off China. They wanted everything to be China and everything internal. Well, the Yongle Emperor came in charge, and he said, no, we don't want to do that. We want to expand. We want to explore. We want to reach out and get trade. So to do that, he commissioned a fleet of ships to be built. These ships were the largest sailing ships ever built. They were 400 feet long. Okay. And here's a model of the Chinese ship compared to Christopher Columbus's ship. The Chinese actually got all the way over to Africa 80 years before the Europeans got down to the Cape of Africa. 80 years. Now, I think the Yongle Emperor failed because he had a good vision. He put things in place to get it working, but he wasn't able to get it so that when he died, it continued on. When he died, Confucianism took back over. They brought the ships back to China and they destroyed them. And they went all internal. And history shows us what happened. The civilization that kept trying to expand and explore became influences of the whole world. And the civilization that turned inward is still trying to catch up and trying to become a world influence today. Now I'm going to jump really far ahead to another leader that's more modern, and that is President John F. Kennedy. And I'm going to play this little clip.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space.
Now, I say he was more successful than the Yongle Emperor, even though they were both had big visions, because he actually was able to keep things moving after he died. In fact, after he died, we actually did get men to land on the moon. And that led to one of the series of the most unique series of photographs that I think is out there. And that is the Earthrise over the moon horizon. And it also led to the shuttle. Now the economic impact of the shuttle and of the Apollo to Florida has been enormous, and really has really changed Florida, especially down where I live and work at the Kennedy Space Center. Now one of the things that's interesting is a lot of people don't know that the Kennedy Space Center is actually in the middle of a wildlife refuge. And so you actually have the high tech and the big events of trying to get things into space right next to nature. I drive in every day, I see manatees, I see endangered birds, alligators. Had them up under the truck when I've come into work. So it's kind of a little surprising going out to get in the truck and have a 6-foot alligator under your vehicle. Well, I understand this is a wildlife refuge here too, so it's probably very similar. A little bit different species of animals. Then the question that comes about is, what is NASA doing now? The shuttle's gone. I mean, where are we going? It's a constant question. Where are we going? Well, we are still working in human spaceflight. We are working to develop ways to get into space for people. We do unmanned spaceflight. We send probes to other planets. We send satellites around the Earth. And we also do research and development in order to meet those missions. And we also do some earth sciences. I personally do some earth sciences, which we talked a little bit about. Now this is the team that I officially lead, part of the team. It's hard to get everybody together. And I say I officially lead because I organizationally lead these folks. In some cases I lead them on other things. But I say organizationally lead because I don't tell them every day what they need to do. I don't direct them day to day on what they need to do to develop the new materials that when the insulation on the wire cracks, it will automatically heal itself. I don't tell them and direct them day to day what to do, that if there's some unusual growth on one of the vehicle components that are going to go up to station, how to figure out what that is. And I don't lead them day to day on developing the instrumentation that's needed to go forward. Now in some cases I do get involved and I lead them, but most of the time I'm not. I empower them and I organizationally let them be able to do their leadership. And I think that's another key thing, is you have to be able to let the people around you do their job. It's a very difficult thing to do. Most of us like to kind of control things, and you got to let it go. Now currently I am the branch chief, but I'm actually shifting out of that. Like I said, things are constantly changing, and I'm not going to be the branch chief, at least for a time, starting next week. I'm going to be going back into the technical field. The person that's going to be the branch chief is the lady in the middle back row. She's going to be the branch chief at the time. You see, notice it's a very diverse team, and I'm very proud of the diversity. And the people that aren't in the picture are just as diverse. It makes a big difference in trying to solve a problem, is getting people from multiple different backgrounds in order to help view problems differently. Now, I said that we are still working to go forward in space and get people into space. And we're actually going into two different areas. One of the areas is into low Earth orbit. In other words, getting people into the space station. The other area we're working on is to get people back to the moon or the Lagrange points, to near Earth asteroids, or to Mars. And I will talk now. So whenever I mention that, there's always the question, why don't we just send probes? Why do we need to send people into space? And my answer to that is there are all kinds of challenges that are associated with sending probes. I think probably a lot of people have seen this. And while it's kind of funny, it actually does bring home a very good point. And that point is that if you send a probe up, all you can do and all you can see and all you can experiment with is what that probe is programmed to do. It's too far away and too long of a delay to be able to control it and even drive it around. It's got to be pre-programmed as to what you're going to do. So you can only do so much. And you can't really mine, you can't really explore and really find out what's there without having people go. Now at KSC, these are some of the areas where we're working. They are designing the big heavy rocket that will get people into past low Earth orbit. That's in the design stages now. It's called the Space Launch System. And our people really aren't designers, so we're not too involved in that. But we are working on the module where people will be able to get into space. And we're actually, this is a picture on the left of the crew module that's at Kennedy Space Center that is at this time being put together. This is kind of a little depiction of how it's going to operate. It's very similar to the way that the Apollo missions worked. Now my team is actively working on this. Every bolt that comes in, all of the adhesives, all of the paints, anything that goes into the vehicle, we validate that it is what the manufacturer says that it is. And that's important because while this particular item won't be manned, it will lead to designs and will lead to manned vehicles. So if we're off and there's a problem, well, they will need our information in order to help to make sure that the vehicles are safe in the future. And then this is just kind of the rough schedule. We're planning to launch that module in 2014 aboard a Delta IV. It might slip depending upon the budgets and things like that. So you can see I've talked about a couple different things that we're involved in, and that's one of the great things is that we are always doing something different. Day to day, it's never the same challenge twice. And so today, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the crew module now, the commercial crew. I'm not going to spend much time on that. But we actually have 3 commercial companies that are working to get people into space. They're scheduled for 2017. But they're actually, all 3 of the companies are planning to send up their own people on them before we send up NASA scientists and astronauts. And SpaceX actually is the one that's sending the payloads up to the station now. We actually sent one up last week that docked on Monday. So we no longer rely on other countries to send our payloads up to this International Space Station. And there's a picture of the International Space Station. Now I like this one because it shows the Earth kind of upside down, if you will. And I also like it because it shows a lot of the Earth. And I'm real interested in developing the instrumentation to be able to take it around and monitor the air. So we can monitor emissions from volcanoes, we can monitor car emissions around a city, we can monitor pollution coming out of plants, manufacturing plants. And so to do this, we actually, I led a team that developed an instrument to do that. And on the cart is the instrument, and the aircraft is the WB-57, which is similar to the U-2 spy planes, has big long wings and flies really high and fairly slow for how high it's flying. And this particular team, members of this team were actually from Johnson Space Center and Kennedy Space Center. So I had to pull the team together. I had to be able to talk and understand the people that were pilots, engineers, scientists, programmers, and be able to pull and understand what they were saying, and at the same time let them to be able to do their job. Now we were the primary instrument on these experiments, but there were actually 2 other payloads on there also. So I had to interface with them also. So as the leader, I had to not only make sure that my team was functioning properly and we've got the instrument working. I also had to interface with the leads of the other teams to make sure we all were able to get the data we needed to get. So it was very challenging because we had people, and the people that were from those were actually from Ames Research Center. So I actually had to pull people together from 3 different centers across the country. And that was it was very challenging, but it was very fun also. Now, in addition to the people in the States, we had the Costa Rican scientists. The lead scientist is the one that's on your right, and he had his team. Some of the members of the team actually didn't speak any English, and my little bit of Spanish didn't go real far. But we actually worked together. The instrument that we developed is right there in the foreground. And you can see we designed the instrument initially just to be flown on the airplane. But as we were going along, we actually we decided that it was better to be able to carry it and put it on other aircraft. So you have to be very flexible in what you're doing, because you never know. You might be saying, this is the path and this is the way to go. But you have to be willing to change and go to a different path. So you don't lose your vision, but your vision can kind of morph, I guess, and kind of change a little bit. And this was really fun because we actually took it to the volcano. We carried it up there, and that's me on the left in the red shirt, and the lead Costa Rican scientist on the right. We're collecting data from a fumarole. Of course, the people from up in that area, they were perfectly fine at 3,000 feet, but you know, those of us that live at 10 feet, we kind of had a hard time kind of doing that. Then we also interfaced and worked with the equivalent of the Costa Rican Coast Guard. And they actually flew our instrument on the plane, on one of their planes. You can see that we've got the tape on the side. That's our sample line going out onto the wing. And we flew in the back and we operated it and took the readings. So the team, the interfaces, the leader that I had to deal with kept growing and growing while I was down there. I started out dealing with the team just at Kennedy Space Center. Then I had to deal with the team at Johnson Space Center, then at Ames, then at Costa Rica scientists, and then with the Costa Rican pilots. This is a picture of one of the volcanoes we were flying around. That one's Poas. And out on the wing, on the left, you can see the little hook. That's our sample. We actually draw the sample down into it. And we had a GPS setting out there. Now this data is kind of interesting. I'm not going to get into a lot of data, but what we were able to do is we were able to take this and actually plot where it is. So the red is where things are more concentrated, and the green are things where less concentrated. And so we had quite a bit of success on this mission, because I always envision, the plume coming out of the volcano, kind of coming up. But what happens is they get the wind shears going across Costa Rica, and the plumes actually go closer to the ground. And one of the areas where we actually carried it, just a couple years ago, became more active and erupted. And it's a gas eruption. So it killed off all the vegetation. They had to evacuate everybody. And even to this day, the vegetation is dead. We also put it in the back of a car and we drove it around the city. We started at the airport and we drove around. And again, the red is a higher concentration. And it's kind of interesting that the place that had the highest concentration of pollution was in front of the hospital, and it seemed like to be in front of the schools. Kind of the places you probably don't want to be the most concentrated were. So this was a very exciting and very challenging mission, because it was ever-changing, and that's one of the things I think you need to be prepared for, is for change. And not only do we work with human spaceflight, we also do stuff in probes, unmanned spaceflight. We have all kinds of satellites, deep space probes, rovers. They've come through Kennedy Space Center, and we've worked with them. We've helped to make sure that they did not have contamination or faulty materials to help make sure that the missions were successful. The human space missions, you had the ultimate challenge of making sure that people didn't get killed. These was a challenge of making sure you don't lose billion-dollar assets, or that you don't spend millions of dollars to launch something that doesn't work. And it's also a challenge because a lot of probes actually have to come and be launched at a specific time. Sometimes they have such a small window that if you don't launch within this day, you have to wait a couple years before you can launch it again. So when we're working on this and they come up with an issue, and we go in there and our team is involved with it, trying to figure out what's happening, it can very often be under a crunch, and we really is very intense. And the Mars rover was one of the latest ones that landed, and we did do work with Curiosity also. Now, one of the ones that I'm glad we worked with was the Hubble. I wasn't with NASA during the initial Hubble mission. If you remember, the Hubble went up, and after it went up, the scientists discovered the mirror was messed up. It was 1/50th, the flaw was 1/50th of the thickness of a piece of paper. But that made it so bad it was pretty much useless. So then we had to do a service mission, basically put glasses on it. And then we did another service mission in order to make sure to do more upgrades and improve the resolution and different things. And those missions I was involved in and helped to make sure that they were successful, because they were launched aboard the shuttle. And anything that went up with shuttle, we were involved with to help make sure it was safe. And we also helped with the payload itself to help make sure the payload actually did what it wanted to do. And these actually led to some fantastic pictures of our galaxy. Just kind of show them a little bit, some of the galaxies colliding. Now, this picture is one of my all-time favorites. If you look up in the sky, there are places that are dark. We see no light. No matter how big of a telescope we have on the Earth, it's dark. So what Hubble did was it went around the Earth, and every time it went around the Earth, it could take 2 pictures of the exact same spot. And it did that 400 times, so it had 800 pictures that it put together. And this is what it saw. Now, each one of those dots of light is a galaxy. They're not planets, they're galaxies. And this is just a small part of the overall mosaic. It actually would take up this wall is so big. So it's just incredible, the planets and the galaxies and things that are out there. Now, the Kepler was another one that we helped make sure got launched. It was launched, I think, in 2009. Yeah, we had a lot of rush work on that to make sure it got launched at the proper time. Now, we always talk about planets outside of our solar system, but we've never seen one. We kind of guess they're there. So the Kepler was sent up to help show that they are there. Now, the Kepler can't see the planets, but what it does is it looks at the intensity coming from the stars. And if something goes in front of the star, it dims a little bit. And by how often it dims, you can tell the orbit. And by how much it dims, you can tell the size. And so they've... and here is kind of another little video showing the view. So that's actually looking at a very small part of the sky. And you can look, as we zoom in, you can see there's just too much to try to do very much at a time. And what they do is they initially, you can actually get, anybody can actually get on and become part of the team, an amateur astronomer, and look at these and then say, hey, I think this might be a planet. So they call those candidate planets. And the ones that come back that actually look like that they're planets, they then do more looking at to kind of determine whether or not they are planets. And currently, they have like over 1,000 candidate planets, and they have seen approximately 120 confirmed planets. And some of them are Earth-size or in an orbit a distance from a planet that they think might be able to be comparable to Earth heat and temperature-wise. Now we talked about looking out. Now we're looking back. This is the first picture of the Earth from Mars. So this was from a rover. And we actually, again, worked on that rover to help make sure it was successful. You can see the little dot there. That's Earth. And then there's one that's the Cassini-Huygens, which is, you can kind of see the dot up there where the arrow is. It's pretty small. And all these probes we have worked on. We helped to make sure that they were successfully launched and that they were that they actually performed the way they were supposed to perform. Now we didn't design these ones, but so every part of what you do is needed. I'm going to talk a little bit about the rovers. This is kind of interesting. You can kind of see how they've grown over the years. The latest one is the Curiosity. And those rovers, again, have gone through Kennedy Space Center, and we have worked on them to help make sure they were successful. Now when we do this, like I said, I don't always lead the team that's doing that. I don't always tell the people, okay, you're going to do this today, you're going to do this today, or we're going to do this experiment or that experiment. I empower the people to do that. Now there are times, because of my expertise, when I do lead the team. So you have the two roles, and when you get into supervisory roles, you kind of have to figure out how to manage the two, because they're not always the same, and you have overall different goals. As a managerial leader, I want us to develop our expertise so that we're world-renowned. As the leader of a team, I want to get the job done. Now again, there are challenges with robotic exploration too, and here's another little challenge that we have to worry about. Now we've only had that happen a couple times, so. Now one of the things we're trying to do with the probes that we send to other planets is try to figure out what's actually there so that we can use them when humans go there. Because one of the things we want to do is try to get and make fuel or oxygen or water to help support us. Now here's a little graphic that shows you that if we were able to refuel the vehicles at different points rather than take all of our fuel from Earth, how much less you'd have to use than Apollo used. And it's kind of interesting. We're actually, the team that I'm going back to be technical is working on things to look at what is coming off and what's on the moon. So I mentioned a little bit about RESOLVE. It's a big long acronym you can read there. But the purpose of RESOLVE is to go to the moon and confirm that there actually is water there. Now we have some indicators that there is water, but it's not been confirmed. And we've not confirmed it on Mars either. We have indications that there's water. So what we're going to do is we're going to send a probe to the moon and drill down, take a sample, and verify that there's water. Now it's again, this is a big team, and I'm working on a very specific part of it. The big team includes people from KSC, JS, Johnson Space Center, Jet Propulsion Lab, Canadian Space Agency, people from all over the agencies working on this. And I'm becoming a lead in one of the areas. Now, I'm not always a lead in an area, at least not an official lead, but I always have kind of tended toward the leadership role where I would do things to help make sure things got accomplished, help the vision to get done, and help to bring people along. And even in training classes, if you're in a training class and you very often, if you do group things, some people just kind of become the leaders of those groups. So even if you're not officially a leader, there are times when you just naturally kind of go into that role. Because people, when you start being a team, there's always need somebody to help pull them together. And so I'm doing that for the instrument that actually is going to determine and verify that there's water. So there's people that are doing the drills, people that are going to take it, heat it up. But the instrument I'm working on is, without ours, the rest of it really isn't going to matter too much, because we're going to be the one that actually verifies that there is water. And we're actually going to try to get a little droplet of water so we can actually get a picture of the drop of water. I mean, that's pretty cool that you'd be able to have a first picture of water produced on another body. Now the project has actually come along quite a ways. It's scheduled to launch in 2017. And they've done some preliminary work out in Hawaii. And these are the two different rovers on the left and the right. On the left you can see it's a US and it also has a Canadian. Canadians actually are doing the rover. And in the middle, kind of that silver part kind of in the middle of the middle picture is the instrument that I'm working on. That's, to me, is kind of the heart of the instrument. So we have to actually work with the people that are designing the way to take those gases that come off and bring them over to us so that we can actually in some way see what it is and see how much it is. So it's an integration thing. So as the leader of a small part of this, we have to work with integrating. I mean, you're never on an island. At least I've never worked anywhere where I was on an island. And you are always having to work with other people and to bring everybody together to work toward that common goal. And it's important to have that common goal and have people together. I'll give you a really good example. One of the reasons why I'm involved in this is that one of the people that was doing the technical stuff got extremely ill and is out on medical leave. And so they needed my technical expertise to step in. So she had set stuff up in order that it could carry on if something happened to her. She didn't keep it to herself. So you never know what might happen. And if you have a vision and you have a passion to get something done, you really do need to make sure that you have other people able to do that, and you set it up. Some of the old timers that I used to work with, they thought, you pull all of it in, and that's their power, and that's their control. And that actually will destroy you, and it actually is the opposite effect. One of the toughest things that I had coming in as a leader was actually to learn to release. You empower your team, you make sure your team is competent, and you let them do their work and not get down into the nitty-gritty and try to tell them what to do every day. Because if you do that, you miss the big picture and you miss pulling the team together and interfacing with the other organizations, the other teams. And so this is just kind of an overall picture of what that is, of what we do at Kennedy Space Center. Kennedy Space Center, I love working out there. I love coming out there and seeing the animals, and I love the versatility. I hope I got a little bit of that across. We work on more regular analytical chemistry where things are failing and we try to figure out what it is. And we also develop new instrumentation in order to do things on center and the Earth. And we also do things for other planets. So it's a really wide range of things. And I've really enjoyed working out there, and it's a privilege that not too many people get to get to have. So, but now I'll take any questions that anybody might have.
Over on the other side of the wall, for anybody who has a question for Dr. Nate.
Hi, I'm Grady Trimble, and I'm a communication major here. I was wondering, you talked about the diversity in the teams. Can you discuss a time where there was a disagreement and caused by the diversity, and you kind of had to resolve that problem, and how that process took place?
Yes, that's really important, because when you start getting people that are very competent in what they do, we have a tendency to get an ego. And I say I want people with an ego, but I want to be able to have it in check. But yes, we've definitely have conflict. I actually was having some conflict today. Somebody was having an issue with one of the people about how some analysis should be performed. So what I do is I get the people together and I talk about it, and I try to get them to lay out the plan, because typically if they start listening to each other, they're able to come together and come up to an agreement as to where they want to go. It's just they're seeing it a little bit differently. Very often they're cross-talking. They're saying the same thing. They're just talking past each other. But we're all trying to go toward the same place, and I think that's key. It's just make sure that you realize we want to go to the same place. We want to get the customer what they need. We want to be successful. And people typically have a tendency to cool down and allow that to happen. You do get people sometimes, some people have a little bit more of a volatile personality than others. Sometimes people get a little bit more boisterous, and sometimes you just have to calm that down. Sometimes you have to separate them a little bit and just kind of cool down a little bit, then come back together. So it's learning how to communicate for everybody.
Thank you.
Great question.
My name is Evan Oip. I'm an international relations major. I was wondering, how do you best facilitate communication? I mean, there's a lot of technology going on, and I imagine a lot of the departments can't always communicate. What challenges do you see in the communication, and how often would you say that miscommunications can arise because of the technology used?
That's actually a very good question. People overuse emails. Emails, people send them out, and people misunderstand emails. Most of your communication is nonverbal. So you send an email out and people will read into what you're saying. So emails, I find, are good for laying out things that are very specific, that can't be interpreted. Say, well, we need to get this done, we need to get that done, we need to do this. Otherwise, it works better if you can communicate either over the phone or in person. You can do some things with WebEx that does work sometimes, but it's not quite the same. Because when you get into the world, you actually decide that most decisions are not made when you're sitting in the conference room. Most of the decisions are made out with people, talking with them on the phone, face to face. Then you get together and kind of formalize it in the meetings. So WebEx has a place, but you have to be careful that you don't think you're doing all your communication with that. So you have to find the right tool for what you're trying to communicate. It's a very big challenge, and actually a lot of our electronic stuff is actually making it more of a challenge than it used to be. Because it used to be your natural tendency would be to get up, go walk the 2 cubes and talk to somebody. Now your natural tendency is just to send an email to that person. And that creates conflict, misunderstandings and stuff a lot. So I try to make a point of getting up and going and walking.
I have one more question. Your specialty is chemical analysis, correct?
Correct.
Would you say it would be more important to find water on the moon, or to find volatiles in the asteroid belt and be able to harvest those?
Well, they're both important. If we can do it on the moon and show that it's there and demonstrate that our system actually works to look for water, then it allows us to be able to do things farther out. The moon doesn't have as much of a delay in communication, and the bandwidth is not quite as narrow. So you're able to do a little bit more with that. And so it's kind of a leapfrog. Yeah, you actually would want water out on the farther ones. Because, I mean, the ultimate goal is to go to other planets. So you're right. Having water on the moon would be important, so you could maybe fuel there, and then maybe out at one of the asteroids would be important. So the more you could do that, you could maybe hop, do kind of a planet hop, if you will, in order to get that.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, my name is LaTanya Davis. I'm a health science major. I like how you put emphasis on the letting the team do their job. Do you think if you had a more micromanaged leadership style, will it produce the same outcome as towards your team?
No. Your team actually, I think, becomes less productive. Now, there are times when you have to micromanage. I mean, it's kind of, I guess there are some jobs where you have to. And there are times when you have to get on people and say, okay, you got to get this done today. But overall, if you micromanage all the time, it takes the creativity, it takes a lot of the ownership of what people are doing out of it. Because if you let them open to do things to get where they want it, where we all want to go, people take ownership of that, and they take pride in making sure that it actually does that. But if you micromanage them, tell them to do this, to do that, then people kind of just back off and say, okay, well, you told me to do that, that's what I'm going to do. So you actually, I think you have a negative, and overall, most of the time, you have a negative outcome if you micromanage too much. It's the way it is with me. If somebody comes and micromanages me, it drives me nuts. And one thing I've had to learn from that is that I'll have a vision of what I want something to be at the end, and I'll let the team go, and they'll come back with something that does exactly what we want, but it's different than I envisioned. And so I've had to learn to let that be acceptable. Because very often they'll come back and be much better than what I had thought of, but it's different. And that's where people sometimes get caught up is, well, it's not the way I had thought that it was going to be, but it does everything, if not more, than what you wanted. So you have to be able to let that go, and I think that's important.
Thank you.
Hello, my name's Nico. I have a question for you, but one time I heard that a couple of years later on that some astronauts here in the United States would bring some supplies to Mars and try to make it like Earth. And possibly, how are they going to do that?
Right. I guess that's kind of some people's big vision. I mean, the idea is to try to put some kind of atmosphere on the Mars, but one of the reasons why we have an atmosphere is because of our magnetic poles that blocks the particles that are coming from the sun and keeps our atmosphere from blowing away. So I'm not really sure how we'd actually get an atmosphere there. But the idea is to be able to go there and maybe they'll find things that could live in that environment and try to help it. I mean, that's, I guess, kind of a long-term vision. Some people actually think about going there and mining and maybe take some of the resources and use them both for there and maybe bring it back to Earth. So there's a lot of different applications for what the long-term vision of getting to Mars. But that's kind of neat. If you go to Kennedy Space Center Visitor Center, at least they used to have a little thing where they kind of talked about that, and it's really kind of a cool idea to be able to think about kind of the Star Trek Genesis thing, if you remember that episode. So yeah.
Thank you.
question. You talked about empowering others that you lead, and about how you need to make sure you leave your ideas behind, and your entire team is on point with your vision. And in order to do that, you have to have a very strong motivation, a fervor for your work, a passion. And that's my question. Is I'm curious, what's your motivation for getting up and going to work in the morning?
That's a good one. I like doing things that are beyond me, that are bigger than me. I mentioned about the instrument that I've made in graduate school, people used after I left to get their PhDs. The system we did for Costa Rica, the Costa Rican scientists have flown that around all different types of volcanoes and things that I was not involved in. We actually had them do it so they could actually do more mapping. So that's what drives me, is to be able to do something that's bigger, that helps in some small way, kind of helps better the people around you, help the people around you, and you kind of thing sometimes sounds kind of corny, but to help the human race. Because I think all this and this exploration and the research and development is all good for the human species. So that kind of gets me. I mean, play my little part in it. That's what drives me.
Thank you.
Hi, Dr. Griffin.
Hi.
My name is Tiffany. I'm going for the leadership minor. From my understanding, leadership is about empowering change, and working in NASA, an organization that is grounded in facts and data. Is it hard to encourage change when you are constricted by the guidelines and procedures of NASA? And can you tie in your personal beliefs to how you lead a team of people looking for facts?
Looking for what?
Facts.
Facts. Well, we kind of have two different drivers for change. Scientists are usually pretty, you're right, kind of want to sit in one area and don't like to change. But the government and NASA does like to change. So yes, you're right, there's kind of the conflicting things that happen quite a bit. And I find that talking with people, communicating with them, telling them things well before it's going to happen, that it might be happening. Tell them why it might be happening. Get them prepared for it, so that you can so that when it happens, they're ready and they're able to accept it better. I found that if you just go up to them and say, okay, you're now going to be doing this, and this is going to happen. Oh no, the first thing is to push back. But if well before that, you can start telling them, well, this looks like this might be going on. Well, that pushback happens before it's happening, and to a smaller extent, so that when it does happen, they're more able to accept it. Because I think most people, when change happens, your first tendency is to dig in your heels and say, I don't want to do that change. So the communication is really key. And it's the toughest thing too, because some people, an email is fine. Some people you can talk to them once or twice. Some people you have to tell them all the time and in all the different ways. So it's a really, really big challenge. No matter how much you try it, there are going to be people, and you're going to hear, well, I didn't know. Nobody told me. I didn't know about it. But that's...
I just have one more thing. At UNF, they talk about the pursuit of truth and knowledge. So does your knowledge of other galaxies and space constrain your truth of religion?
No. No, I don't believe it does. Not for me. I mean, you can get into all kinds of philosophical details about it, but to me it just reinforces that my beliefs that I think the more I see and the more I learn, the more it just makes me if there is a being, supreme being of whatever type, that how much more incredible is it that there's that much more out there. So I don't I guess if I believed that heaven was up in the clouds, it might. But I think my belief is much broader and more dynamic. So it does make you have to be, I think, a little bit more open. You can't be too narrow, or it does. Yeah. Very good question.
Hey, Dr. Griffin. I want to thank you for coming in tonight. My name is Gustavo Poliak, and I'm majoring in marketing and pursuing my minor in leadership. And I wanted to ask you regarding your time in Costa Rica, how far back do you think that a language barrier can hold a leader back?
Excuse me. Well, a language barrier can hold you back, but it doesn't even have to be a language barrier of a different language. You can have a language barrier in English. So you can cross-communicate, but to really lead somebody, you have to have some way to be able to communicate. So like when we were down on the team, the Costa Rican lead could speak English. He speaks English fine, but the other people didn't. So we had to find other ways to be able to communicate. So would I have been able to be a really good leader for them in the long term and over multiple projects and get into the details? Probably not so much, unless there was some way that we could kind of bridge that communication gap. But you run into the same thing in English. People understand words to be different and understand stuff. So you have to make sure that what you're trying to say is actually somehow accepted by the people. Yeah, I mean, if you have a translator, you can work with that also. But yeah, if I was going to lead a team of folks from Costa Rica constantly, I would learn Spanish well enough where I could speak their language. I wouldn't expect them to learn my language. Yeah.
Hi, Dr. Griffin. My name is Kayla Hayes, and I currently don't have a major because I'm very undecided. My first question is, I know a lot of people have so many different passions, and especially coming into college, they don't know which one they want to follow or what they want to do with it. So my question for you is, have you had to give up any of your passions to do what you do now, and if so, do you regret it?
Well, there's always choices in everything you do. You have to weigh and measure. But yeah, I mean, currently I have limited my professional career a little bit to stay closer to the technology because of my family. I've got a 9 and 10-year-old, and so I don't want to spend and go and work and uproot them and move them to other centers and stuff at this point in life. So there are trade-offs. You have to decide what you want to do. And hopefully you'll find things that are more of a passion than others. I had a friend of mine, one time we were talking to a student who said, you need to find what you love to do and do that. Don't work at a restaurant just so you can go out and surf in the mornings. But if you love to surf, then go out and try to be a professional surfer if that's your love and your passion. I mean, so take your love and try to take it and go where you want to go. But I put it even in addition to that, I say, maybe it's because I'm a scientist and a little bit more practical sometimes. I say you also have to look at your life. How do you want to live? You know, I think that's important also. If you love doing something and you can't make a living at it, then that would probably not be where I would suggest you go and make your career. You know, if you want to be able to have a big house on the ocean and stuff, I would say probably don't be an artist. A few of them make enough money, but most of the artists don't. But so you've got to decide what your drive is and what your passions are, and make those trade-offs. Yes.
And my second question is, do you believe leadership is a trait that you have to be born with? Or do you believe that there's a certain process you can go through to become a great leader such as yourself?
Well, I think you have natural tendencies that you're born with. And as you go through your classes, you'll realize there are different types of leaders and different traits. And you'll figure out which one you typically lean toward. And make sure you don't go to that style at times when it's not needed, when it's detrimental. I have friends that are leaders that are very much, get it done, get it done, get it done, you know. And there are times when that's completely needed. And that's not my style, but when it's needed, I get into that mode. But if it's done all the time, I think it's detrimental. So you have traits that you're born with, but I think you develop your other traits and realize when and where to allow your natural traits to develop.
Thank you.
Two more questions, Dr. Griffin, okay?
How you doing, Dr. Griffin? My name is Darrell Jones. I'm an electrical engineering student here at UNF. Quite often we hear comments from potential employers that engineering graduates have poor leadership skills and tendencies. What do you feel that the professors and staff here at the undergraduate level can do to improve those skills and abilities? And what specifically would you like to see in individuals that might come to work for you?
Yeah, that's really important. One of the things that's a shock to students coming out of school is when you're going through school, everything is about you and what you're doing, and and then when you get into a team in work, it's totally different, and that's a big shock for folks. So I mean, you have team projects, which I think kind of helps that, but I'm not sure how to completely overcome that. That's a tough thing. But one of the things I've noticed is that maybe get more of a diverse team. So like if you're doing something electrical engineering team project, bring in other engineers and kind of maybe trade off who's leading it so they can learn to kind of release control over some of this stuff. Because you come up through school and it's all about you. You do it, it's you focus it, you get it done. Then you get in and try to get a leadership role, then you have to let it go. You have to get somebody going along with you, make sure they're getting it done, but they have to do their work. And if you get in there all the time, that just creates havoc, and people don't like that. So that's one of the biggest challenges that I've seen from the people that I've seen coming out of college, is that they do come in and they can't release the control. So I'm not 100% sure how to do that, but maybe more diverse teams or something to allow that.
And one other question. Understanding that you are in chemistry, what area of STEM would you like to see more activity being placed upon?
Well, I think we need it in just about every area. It's hard to really say because we need to do the fundamental research. The United States has always excelled at the new stuff. That's what's always kept us ahead, was we always have come up with the new idea, the new this, the new that. Other people have sometimes taken it and improved that, but we've come up with the new stuff. So I think all the different areas I think we need to focus on some of that a little bit more, and not on the short term, this is what we're going to do and this is what we're going to get out of it. Kind of more fundamental and more longer term stuff. So I don't know if there's one area of STEM that I would say is more important. I think we need a longer vision than what we currently have.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Dr. Griffin. Hi, Dr. Griffin. My name is Griffin. I'm a biology major here at UNF. And I had more of a science question than a leadership question. It was, I know you were talking about Kepler finding inhabitable planets. And you being a scholar in mass spectroscopy, what exactly do you consider inhabitable? There are organisms at the bottom of the ocean, like methanogens, which is their source of methane gas. What exactly are you looking for that you would call inhabitable?
Well, I personally think that when we find life, at least the first time, it's going to be more of a microbe type of life. And I think that'll be a big step. I mean, it used to be that you would think that life couldn't exist without the sun, right? And we've shown that you can. You've got the things on the bottom of the ocean, the tube worms and things that do live. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's the first thing we find. That's kind of what I think would probably happen. The goal on the planets out of the solar system is actually to be able to actually see the planet, because we believe that if we can see we know if we can see the planet, we can figure out what the atmosphere is made out of by the light that's coming off of it. And I've heard people, and I think this makes sense, is that if there's life there, it's going to change your atmosphere. The atmosphere we have now wouldn't be composed of what it is without life. It would naturally decompose and decay to something different. And so I think would be probably the first step to see if there's a lot of life on another planet, would be to see the atmosphere and see if we can find one that actually has a different type of atmosphere than what would naturally be occurring. So are we going to see anything, like what we are? I don't know. But I always pose, a friend of mine used to always tell me, there's got to be life on other planets. Got to be why, they're probably visiting us and stuff. And I always say, okay, it's gigantic. But one of those civilizations has to be the most advanced, right? And he'd say, well, yeah. It's like, how do you know it's not us? He didn't like that answer, that question. So. Sorry. Okay.
Dr. Griffin, on behalf of our wonderful student leaders, stand up, guys, help me do this. This is a gift for your visiting us tonight. We hope you'll remember the University of North Florida. Help me thank them.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Refreshments in the back of the room, everybody. I think Dr. Griffin's going to hang around for a couple of minutes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, well, I hope it went
It's wonderful.
well.